is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to CPAacademy.org. My name is Lady Maya, and I'm happy to welcome you into today's webinar on identifying investment scams and protecting your clients. We have two presenters today, and before we get started, I want to go through some housekeeping items and do some technical checks to make sure everything is working. First, if you don't mind going over to the GoToWebinar Questions panel, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. Please let me know that you can hear me and see the slides on your screen. And feel free to let me know where you're listening in from. If anyone is having any technical trouble, please let me know in that questions panel. Please keep in mind there are quite a few of you, and I'll do my best to get around to each of you as quickly as I can. All right, let's see. Richmond, Virginia, Santa Fe, Vegas. Hi, Philadelphia. Hello, neighbor. Jersey, Scottsdale, Idaho, and many, many more. Fantastic. Now that I know everything is working, let's go through some housekeeping for credit. This is a 1-hour webinar and qualifies for 1 CPE credit. The way you earn that credit is fairly straightforward. Just stay logged in for 50 minutes of our allotted time and answer the poll questions. We'll have a total number of 4 polls during today's webinar, and to earn full credit, you'll need to answer at least 3 of those polls. CPE will be issued by the end of the day today and will be available in your CPAacademy.org account. I also want to let you know that we are recording today's webinar, and the archive will be made available to you by the end of the day as well. We also recommend that you take the time to download today's presentation materials, which can be found in the GoToWebinar side panel. Now that we're all set, let's turn today's webinar over to our presenters. Who's taking it away? Is it Tony?
Yes.
Perfect. All yours.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. Welcome. I appreciate you attending this this session on this important topic. Hope you find it informative and useful. Let me introduce myself and our guest speaker, Mark Maddox. Mark is the founder of Maddox, Hargett and Crusoe, which is a law firm specializing in securities litigation. And I've known Mark for over 20 years now, since we were both just very, very young children. And we actually shared office space together for over 16 years. And we still get along. I'll let you scan through Mark's bio here, and won't read those verbatim, but I'll just let you know Mark's got an impressive list of accomplishments and accolades. He has great credentials, great experience in the industry, has had much success, and more importantly, I think Mark has done a great job of helping actual individual clients, kind of victims of our industry, if you will. There are a couple things that, beside his formal bio, that I would point out that this is a particular case that Mark and his firm worked on against a law firm called Stratton Oakmont, which was out of Long Island, run by a fellow named Jordan Belford. That was portrayed in the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, and as entertaining as the movie was, it was hard to take pleasure when you knew, the actual people on the other end of those phone calls. I think they got away with over $100 million that they scammed investors out of. Mark's firm represented over 50% of those people, and got over a 50% award back for those clients. Unfortunately, Mr. Belford, for stealing over $100 million systematically over years and years, was sentenced to only 18 months in jail. And even though he sold the book rights and sold the movie rights, to my knowledge, has never paid a penny of restitution for what he did. There are also some other high-profile cases that Mark's firm has represented clients in. A number of clients that were victims of Bernie Madoff. This particular one was a local dude there in Indiana, which may not have been so much national news, but he was kind of famous for crashing his airplane, faking his death. And the mistake that he made was that when he flew leaving Indiana on his way to Florida, he bailed out over Alabama and didn't calculate that the drag of having the door of the airplane open would not allow the range of his airplane to reach the Gulf of Mexico. Had he been successful and the plane reached the Gulf of Mexico, we probably would have thought that the guy, was gone and perished and got away with it. But because this plane actually crashed in the United States, it brought in a whole host of terrorism charges that went along with it. He, I think, served 8 years in jail and is now back out living in Florida. This case against Prudential was at the time the largest litigation against an individual broker, a retail broker, and I'll let Mark tell more of the story about that case. But I don't know if that record still stands or not. But at the time, it was a record. I'll let you read through. If you haven't read through my bio, I'll let you know that I am the founder of Asset Management Strategies, which is a registered investment advisory firm that works with clients all over the country. But before I started in the investment world, I started out in the tax world and grew up in my father's tax and accounting practice and prepared over 6,000 tax returns over the 15 years that I did that, which was pretty impressive out of a town of about 4,500 people. We did, I think, almost 1,800 tax returns a year. So it was quite a crunch at this time of the year for tax clients. But that taught me how to look out for my clients. And in the conversations I had with clients on a tax basis, they were handing me their W-2s and 1099s and saying, does it look like I'm doing the right thing here? And I said, well, you could do something better if you had something that was tax-free or tax-deferred perhaps. And I don't want to date myself, but in those days, the maximum tax bracket was 70%. And it didn't take a lot of incentive to get people to try and do something to save some of those taxes. And they came back the next year and they had some, more life insurance, or they had a real estate limited partnership. And I quickly recognized that these really weren't the most appropriate things for my clients, but it was the number one and number two highest commission products anybody could sell my clients. So that's kind of how I got into the industry, was first to protect my clients. And I didn't really realize for many years later how unique that was in the industry. Our firm works with clients all over the country. We have relationships with law firms, CPA firms, other financial services professionals that refer clients to us under the Solicitation Act of the Investment Advisors Act of 1940. Some more of my background. I should have mentioned Mark gets lots of press. I think you can see that in his bio, that he's been quoted in a number of places and had great experience. I dug this one out, Mark. This photo is an old photo. I will confess that this is completely unretouched. You and I actually were that handsome back then. And I think the important thing to note in this article where they were talking about our collaboration was that that you at the time were having repeat clients, which is not necessarily a good thing. Where you had represented them in a litigation, they went back out into the securities industry, in the investing world, and something bad happened to them again. So not only did we form this collaboration to take advantage of not having that happen to their clients again, but also because in the course of your work, it could potentially jeopardize the argument through an arbitration. If they have invested in something that is, again, not suitable, it opens up the argument that the problem is with the client, not necessarily with the broker or the advisor. So first off, I'd like to thank everybody for being here on the eve of a tax season. We have quite an extraordinary number of people signed up. We're just shocked at the number that we've gotten to attend. And I think that's a credit to the CPAs that you care this much about your clients, that you want to learn how to protect your clients from these types of things. We recognize that the CPA is the gatekeeper for most people when it comes to who is their most trusted advisor. That means that over 80% of the responses say that a CPA or tax professional is their most trusted advisor, which leaves Mark and I and their doctor and their shoe repair guy and their car repair guy to fight over the other 20%. And I think that's because that people are legally required to come in every year and bare their financial soul to get their tax return prepared. And so, to that, I would credit you all for being here and appreciate that. And as Mark says, you know, the CPA is the first line of defense because you're going to see a lot of the bad things that people do from an investment standpoint long before they pick up the phone and call an attorney. So thank you. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. I'm going to run through today's outline a little bit. We're going to cover a couple things from, you know, the types of scams that we see, the types of offenders, the types of offenses that we see, and what you should look for and what you should do. We'll also touch briefly on the tax treatment, which is we have some resources to support you there. So, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you and work through the slides, and then kind of interject things that I want to make a comment on. But I'll hand it over to you. Thanks, Mark, for being here.
All right, Tony, thank you for having me, and hello to everybody who's watching this presentation today. I'm Mark Maddox, obviously, coming to you from the north side of Indianapolis in a city called Fishers, Indiana. And I always welcome the opportunity to talk to CPAs for the very reason that Tony mentioned, and that's because, you know, people in my industry recognize that CPAs and tax preparers really are the first line of defense that most taxpayers and investors have if they have been the victim of some kind of investment fraud or scam. There's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of them are very psychological reasons. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of these. A lot of investors, if they've had an investment problem, first of all, many people are very private and they don't share their affairs with anybody. You know, people from a certain generation, you know, just kind of grew up thinking they didn't share the details of their investment situation, even with, you know, their own adult children. Some people, when they believe they have a problem, they're just embarrassed, and their embarrassment kind of freezes them and they don't want to talk about it with anyone. Some of them are in denial because they've been very trusting of their financial advisor, and they just can't let themselves believe that that trusted financial advisor would do them wrong. One of my favorite sayings is, you know, denial is more than a river that runs through Egypt in these situations. Some senior investors are concerned that if they acknowledge that they've been the victim of some kind of investment fraud, they're concerned that they're going to lose some of their independence. You know, as people get older, I think that's a big concern to a lot of them as their aging and extended age starts to prohibit them from doing things that they've previously done. One of the last things that people like to hold on to is sort of their financial independence. And if they have to admit that, you know, they just got scammed for a few $100,000, there's a risk that their adult children are going to step in and kind of take that function away from them. A lot of these investors just don't know who to go to. You know, they don't know a guy like Mark Maddox. So they just, they don't do anything about it. And finally, a lot of them have what I kind of call a victim's mentality. You know, when someone has been the victim of a crime, there's a lot of self-blaming that goes on. And a lot of them think it's their fault or mostly their fault. And therefore, there may not be anything for them to do. So as a result of that, you know, a result of all those complicated financial issues or psychological issues, you know, we only think seniors report about 1 out of 25 of the instances in which they have been the victim of a scam or an investment fraud. And boy, you know, it's primarily seniors who are the victims of these frauds. And why is that? Well, seniors have, you know, that many of them have worked their whole lives. Many of them have received inheritances. And by the time they get in their 60s and 70s and 80s, you know, they've obviously accumulated more money than they're ever going to have at any point in their lives. And the other thing a lot of seniors have is time. You know, they have time to talk to people. Some of them, as we'll talk about here later, get very lonely as they get into their extended years. A lot of them lose spouses or lose significant others. Some of them, you know, are divorced. Their adult kids and their grandkids aren't nearby. And as a result, they wake up every morning and, kind of look at another boring day without any family to come around to visit them. And some of them are looking to fill that time with pretty much anybody who will pay attention to them. So, we see all those things contributing. You guys are probably generally familiar with some of these types of frauds and scams that have been going around for a while. One of them that was pretty big, I'd say 10 or 15 years ago, was the Nigerian type of scam. This was basically, you would get an email from somebody in Nigeria who might describe themselves as a government official or a business person. And for some reason, they had picked you out of the 7 billion people in the world to try to help them move some of their money to the United States. So, all you've got to do to take part in that is give them a bunch of personal financial information, like a bank account that they can transfer, these millions of dollars to. Those are still out there, but not nearly with the frequency that I think we saw 15 or 20 years ago. Where the scamsters are really making their money these days, I think, is over the internet and through social media. In fact, I'm going to tell you a story about a case that I just heard about in the last week or two that I think illustrates this problem. There was a lady who was about 78, 79 years old, and her husband had just passed away about late 2017, early 2018. So in early 2019, she decides to get on what I would call a dating website called Plenty of Fish. I suspect some of you have heard of it, may even be on it. And after she gets on Plenty of Fish, she very quickly is approached by a person who she believes to be a guy who starts up a relationship with her. And over the course of the next 3 years, this gentleman ends up convincing her to send him and not all at once, but in multiple payments, about $500,000. And so we see a lot of scamsters using social media, websites like Plenty of Fish to sort of fish for victims. And even Facebook, is something that the scamsters will use to try to kind of understand as much information about their potential targets as they can. But cyber fraud, social media as a fishing grounds for the bad guys, to me, is where I think a lot of the action is these days. Tony, you might talk a little bit about how you can protect your identity these days.
Sure. I'm really worried about that Nigerian scam, Mark, because if I ever get an email that says that I'm entitled to millions of dollars and it's legitimate, unfortunately, I'm deleting that almost immediately, and we'll pass up on that opportunity if it's legitimate. The identity protection suggestions came from the cybersecurity head of Fidelity, and we work very closely with Fidelity, hold most all of our accounts at Fidelity as a custodian. But their team is 600 people strong. They may have some of the best cybersecurity in the world. And he offered 3 suggestions. And the first thing, he was a former FBI agent for 15 years working in cybercrime. So the stories that he could tell us were fascinating. Imagine the stories he couldn't tell us were even better. But he said there's pretty much 3 simple things that everybody should do to protect their identity. One is freeze your credit. It's very easy to do. There's no cost to it. If you're going to get a car loan, you can unfreeze it very easily. You can unfreeze it temporarily. You can go right back online. You do have to set up accounts with the providers directly, but these links will go right to the section where you actually freeze your credit. And the purpose of that is that with so much information floating around out there, the real damage is not getting into your account. The real damage is getting access to your credit and getting a home mortgage that may take you 10 years to fight that battle. The second thing is most money sites, most financial sites have the ability to do two-part authentication. Take advantage of that. Most of these criminals are getting lists of usernames and passwords, And if they stumble across one that asks for two-party authentication, they're business people just like everybody else. They cross your name off the line and they go to the next available, victim. The third thing he admitted would be probably overkill for most people, and acknowledged that most people aren't willing to do this. But he suggested getting a tablet or a cheap laptop, and on that device only access your financial sites. Don't go pull up email, don't visit other websites, only access your financial sites on that, because that's the way a lot of this stuff kind of follows you home from the websites that you go to. Even if you're careful enough not to, fall victim to some of these clever, phishing tactics that look like they're coming from legitimate sites. I think that's really good advice. I think it should help to protect everybody there.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of freezing your credit. I think you folks will find, if you haven't looked into this previously, that most of your state attorney general offices have a website you can go to. If you Google the term, freeze my credit in Indiana, it'll take me to the Indiana Attorney General's website, and they've made it real easy to, I think there's 3 credit reporting services that you have to go into each of the 3 and freeze your credit with. But there's buttons there to do it all. The most important thing is, when you go in there and freeze your credit, make sure you're, somehow recalling your username and password, because it might be a year, a couple years before you go back to unfreeze your credit when you apply for that next mortgage or car loan. And then the last group of cases that we see, Ponzi schemes, they're still out there. Basically when someone is telling an investor that they've got a great investment for them, usually is going to have great returns, often unrealistic returns. And the person who is actually running the investment turns out to just put the invested funds in their own pocket. Ponzi schemes have been around for forever, and they're going to be around forever. And a lot of investors don't keep their guards up. Another problem we see are just bad advice, what us lawyers would just call general negligence, when we see financial advisors make recommendations that are just unsuitable or not appropriate for the particular investor. Sometimes we see financial advisors who really fall in love. They literally fall in love with certain types of risky investments and recommend those to anyone, not just people who might have a much higher risk tolerance, and that gets them into a lot of problems. And then affinity fraud, again, has been around for centuries, really. Affinity fraud is when a perpetrator of one of these schemes will go into a community and either be a part of or pose to be a part of that community. It can be a particular religion. It can be a certain neighborhood area. It can be, Tony's going to tell you briefly about an example of the military that the SEC recently took action against, but it's some group of people, and because of the perpetrator being perceived as a part of that group, it causes a lot of the investors to let their guard down. Tony, why don't you tell them about that military example?
Yeah, this is a headline that just came up earlier this week for a guy that served in the military, which is an affinity group. Then he targeted other veterans. And the pitch was that he had some kind of investment scheme that allowed them to buy sand and use it for the course of oil and gas drilling, which I think is a legitimate use of sand. But he was promoting returns that were like 10 to 100% within 30 days. And unfortunately, he got away with about $9.25 million, and it infected 256 investors. But I think the infinity fraud comes from that tacit level of trust that comes because this person is one of our own, in our church or in our whatever that affinity is, whether it's religion or whatever base it is. It could be a country club.
Yeah, back in the days when I was a securities commissioner, now folks, this is going back a lot of years, around 1990, we actually had a case where somebody had actually infiltrated into an Amish community down in southern Indiana and had posed as an Amish person from a different community and was able to victimize about 30 people in that particular community, thanks to some really quick action by a local bank that the Amish community worked with. They called us in. We were actually able to recover all of those funds for those people. But often with these scams, it's not the case. Usually the bad guy makes off with the money, and it's very hard to get it back at that point. Let's talk a little bit about. We got a poll question here, everybody. So.
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll question now. It says, have you ever been involved with a securities arbitration yourself or on behalf of a client? Yes, I have personally. Yes, I have on behalf of a client. And no, your options are listed. I'll keep this up for about 45 seconds or so. Just a reminder, the first poll is up. We will have a total of 4, and you must answer 3 to qualify for that full CPE credit and stay logged in for 50 minutes of our allotted time.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of questions about, answering the poll. This is just the PowerPoint presentation. There should be a separate portal for answering the poll questions. I hope that's clear.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I'm going to go ahead and close out this poll. 96% have voted. And we'll close this out in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll go ahead and share the results. 91% saying no, and 4% for both. Yes, I have personally, and yes, I have on behalf of a client. Back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah.
So let's move on and start talking a little bit about the types of people who engage in investment fraud and investment scams. The first category are, what I would just kind of generally characterize as they're just straight up thieves. These are people, who know what they're doing. They have, put together a plan or a program where they are, they know at the end of the day that they're ripping people off. I do think that a lot of these people probably in their minds try to rationalize it some way. I think many of them that I've talked to and had on the witness stand over the years, I think they do think in the back of their mind that, there is something that's going to happen down the road that is going to enable them to come into a lot of money and pay people off. I saw one case many years ago where a guy, had stolen about $300,000 from people here in the Indianapolis area. And when he got down to his last $20,000 or $25,000, he went to Vegas and played. I think he put the last $25,000 he had on, black 25 or something at the roulette wheel in hopes of, getting a 30-to-1 return and being able to pay people off. Didn't work out for him. He ended up doing a couple years in jail. But a lot of these guys, they're just malicious and purposeful. And, I see a lot of them get into it by, they usually have a little bit of cash needs, some cash shortfall in their personal or business lives. So they, figure out a way to take it from some clients, and they kind of look over their shoulder and notice, hey, nobody caught me on that. Nobody noticed it. So they do it again and they do it again. And before you know it, they've got scores of victims and, have stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars from people. And I'm sure most of you are generally familiar with the Bernie Madoff story, which is the largest Ponzi scheme that we know of in the history of the United States, where Bernie stole about $18 billion from his clients, all the while sending them statements indicating that they were making about 10 to 12% a year, and that the original 17 billion they invested was eventually worth over 50 billion collectively. We see in some instances in the brokerage firm world, just a bad apple, a bad egg that we'll refer to as a rogue broker. And I will say this, that in the brokerage firm world, I think, these days we're seeing less and less of the rogue brokers. We used to see rogue brokers everywhere, from the big national brokerage firms that you all have heard of, like Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley, down to the little no-name brokerage firms. But kind of a funny thing happened about 14, 15 years ago, when America went through the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. A lot of the bigger brokerage firms, what we call the wirehouses, got bought up by banks. Merrill Lynch was forced into a shotgun marriage with Bank of America. Previously, I think Payne Weber was bought up by UBS. And as you guys are all probably generally familiar, banks have always had a lot tighter compliance procedures than brokerage firms historically have had. But once these big banks bought these brokerage firms, a lot of those tighter compliance procedures trickled down. So these days, we're seeing a lot less cases with the big wirehouse firms. We're seeing a lot less rogue brokers with the bigger firms. Where we are seeing a lot of the problems still with what I would call smaller brokerage firms, and even small offices, like 1 or 2 person offices, like we have in, well, anywhere from our big cities to even our more rural communities. It's in those smaller offices that a lot of these smaller brokerage firms are just going to have less compliance procedures. It's going to be easier for people to get away with bad conduct than it is these days in a big brokerage firm. And then the final area that we see a lot of problems, I would just kind of call this next bullet point fiduciary duty, because at the heart of fiduciary duty, a financial advisor is supposed to put the client's interests ahead of their own. And unfortunately, for a lot of investors, it doesn't work that way. Now, again, going back 20, 30 years, when most financial advisors were compensated by commissions only, you used to see a lot of abuse. You used to see a lot of financial advisors, maybe somebody, needed to make a mortgage payment, or needed to make a car payment, or needed to make a tuition payment for their kids. So they pushed clients into different products in order to generate commissions so that they could pay their bills. We still do see some of that going on today, but the financial services industry has had a big move to fee-based business, managed money, like Tony conducts his business. And that is, generally speaking, for most investors, not all, but for most investors, that's going to be the better way to have your money managed, to put your financial advisor on the same side of the table as you, and takes out the commission incentive. Tony, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think, the industry has done a much better job of policing itself. I think mostly because they get tired of just carte blanche writing checks to firms like yours. Those, I think we'll cover the different, specific types further in the presentation. But yeah, I think the challenge for the consumer is that, this is like a foreign language to them, and they don't want to learn this foreign language. So when they're doing their due diligence of who to work with and how do we know if we can trust these people or not, they really don't know the questions to even ask. And usually it defaults to something like, what's your fee, or what's your track record? Because those are numeric numbers that they can measure one against somebody else. And unfortunately in this industry, you can't give somebody your $40 company brochure and have them walk out of your office thinking, yeah, I can really trust this person. It's just not that simple, and it's not that easy. But I do think that the industry has changed itself and policed itself better to the point where it takes less trust on the behalf of the investor or the consumer to be able to put themselves in a position where they're not going to be taken advantage of.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that change. We've seen a lot of our cases migrate over the years from a lot of cases with the bigger wirehouses that used to have poor compliance procedures and did more commission-based business, to the smaller brokerage firms and some smaller registered investment advisors, like I said, that are often in very small offices. So let's talk just a little bit about, again, the types of offenders here. Stockbrokers are required to subscribe to a suitability standard, which basically means they have to make investment recommendations. They have to know their client. They have to make investment recommendations that are suitable for that client based on, all of that client's demographics. Now, stockbrokers these days, in the old days, they used to be very heavy on commissions. Again, I see a lot more stockbrokers these days who kind of have a mixed business. Usually, most stockbrokers will have a portion of their business that's fixed fee business and a portion of their business that is commission based. We have investment advisors, registered investment advisors, RIAs, that we talk about, they're all subject to a fiduciary standard, okay, which is basically the highest standard that the law is going to impose on financial advisors here in the United States. And again, the vast majority of your RIAs are going to be fee-based. There are a small percentage that may charge you an annual fee, and maybe even a small percentage that might charge you some commissions for certain types of products. But again, speaking in generalities, most of your RIAs are going to be fee-based. You have your insurance agents, who are out there basically selling insurance products. Most of your insurance products are not going to be covered under the securities laws. The biggest exception to that is probably variable annuities, but most of your life-oriented policies and fixed annuities and so forth are going to be insurance products, and your insurance agents are compensated almost exclusively on a commission basis. And then you've got this group of people who are, very problematic. They aren't registered as anything. People in that category are usually or almost always doing something illegal and improper. They're usually engaged in some kind of a investment scam or investment fraud. And that's one of the ways you guys can pick up on a potential fraud with one of your clients, is to say, okay, who are you dealing with? Okay, let's go to the databases and look these people up and see if they're registered as a stockbroker or an investment advisor, an insurance agent. If they aren't registered as any of those, there is a high probability, that your client has been the subject of a fraud or a scam.
Yeah, Mark, I think the thing that's really confusing to a lot of professionals, and especially consumers and investors, is that a lot of times people wear multiple of these hats at the same time. You could be a stockbroker with a big firm that also has a registered investment advisory arm that also offers, index annuities that are completely unregulated on the security side. I remember years ago when we started doing things exclusively on a fee basis, and this is going back 25, 30 years. But I ran into an acquaintance of mine who was a stockbroker, and I asked him, "Are you doing any business in the fee-based side of the business?" And he said, "Well, I know that's the future of the industry, and I know that that's the best thing for my client. But what I've been doing is I've been doing about 30,000 of production a month, and then as soon as I hit that for the balance of the month, I start putting people into fee-based accounts." And I thought, wow, if you run across my grandmother, I sure hope it's at the beginning of the month.
Yeah, Tony, you're absolutely right. I mean, many of your financial advisors these days have got licenses in all these areas. It's quite common for particularly somebody who is breaking into the industry. Maybe they have them go get their insurance licenses initially because those are the easiest tests to pass. And then at some point down the road, they, will get their stockbroker licenses, Series 7 and 63, or their investment advisor license, Series 65. So a lot of your financial advisors out there are wearing 2 or 3 hats when they're dealing with people.
Yeah, I think that, that talks about the labels that you have here, where, it could be called a stockbroker, could be called, wealth manager, financial planner, a lot of different descriptions for those different types of offenders. And then I think we've covered this too, Mark, a little bit, the types of firms, the wirehouses, independent broker dealers, which would be, where they're not an employee of the broker dealer, but they're still governed by the broker dealer. And both the wirehouses and independent broker dealers, most of them have a registered investment advisory arm as well. So there's a little bit of kind of commingling there. The RIA community, kind of sits by itself, where many of them do not have any ties to any broker dealers because they don't do any commission products. The difference between a registered investment advisory firm and a broker dealer is a broker dealer allows you to sell things on commission, where an RIA is not allowed to sell anything on a commission on a securities basis. So the fee base relative to the commission based, I think, reduces the due diligence requirements for investors and consumers considerably, because on a fee base you have no incentive to promote or sell or advise people to buy one product over another. And that could be a different mutual fund. It could be more in bonds as opposed to stocks. There's no incentive in any way to manipulate that. And then the last is captive agents, which, I think was grown from the insurance side of the world, who were missing out on the security side. So they fostered their own internal broker dealers. And what you see at, I think, wirehouses, independent brokers, and especially the captive agents, when you look at the industry reporting, it's still a fairly small percentage of their business that they do on the fee basis. So even though they have it available, it's still, I think the average probably would be less than 30% of the business that they do is on the fee basis.
Okay. One of the most important things, gang, that we're going to tell you today is we're going to introduce you to this concept of the FINRA broker check. The securities world, the investment world, is unique in that you can actually look up a financial advisor at any point in time and learn a lot of things that are posted about them publicly. I will tell you that when I was a state regulator and we got a complaint about a stockbroker, first thing we did was go to the broker check report that you can find by just Googling FINRA broker check or go to this specific website. As a lawyer who represents investors, when I get a call or have a meeting with someone, the first thing I will do is put that broker's name in or that investment advisor's name into broker check and see what I can find. If that particular individual has been the subject of prior regulatory action with a state regulator or FINRA or the SEC, you'll see it on his or her broker check report. If there have been customer arbitrations filed or customer complaints in the last few years, they will all end up on a broker's public record. And, the old adage, the trend is your friend. If you pull up a broker's name and you see that he's got 3 or 4 customer complaints, for churning stocks or churning annuities or, selling alternative risky investments, and the particular client that you're talking to is complaining about the same thing, there's a pretty good chance that, your client has been the victim of, a person who's been engaging in this kind of business regularly. Alternatively, a financial advisor who has a clean broker check report, doesn't have any prior evidence, can be evidence that, that financial advisor doesn't have any kind of history of bad conduct. It still doesn't mean that your client might not have experienced something bad. He could just be one of the first ones stepping forward. But I can tell you that everybody in this business looks at the broker check report. If you folks work with your own personal financial advisors, you probably ought to run their name on broker check just to see how clean they come up. But this is going to be one of the most important things that we cover today. If one of your clients, if there's some red flags that are raised about your clients investing, ask them the name of their financial advisor, run the name on broker check, and if it comes up with a person with a real checkered past, there's a good chance that investor may need to talk to a lawyer like me.
Yeah, Mark, especially if those complaints that are historically lodged come from the broker's grandmother, that situation come up. But this is a free site. It's available to everybody. You don't have to be in the industry to use it, and it will link to both the stockbroker side, the FINRA side, and the SEC side, which governs the RIA community. And you can look up individuals and you can look up entire firms as well.
Yeah, just as an example, I think we were talking earlier about my friend Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street. I think when Jordan was eventually kicked out of the securities industry, he probably had 80 or 90 customer complaints on his broker check report at that point in time. And his right-hand man, Danny Porish, also had about the same number by the time he finished at
Mark,
Stratton Oak.
what percentage of successful cases that you've had do you think could have been prevented had the investor just done this very brief check?
You know, that's a really good question, Tony. I haven't really thought about that in great detail, but a lot of them, you know, would it be a third of them, maybe 30 or 40%, possibly, maybe even pushing somewhere around 50% at the end of the day. The problem is, you know, it takes a while for broker misconduct to sort of ripen. You know, it's kind of like wine, or in my case, bourbon. You know, it needs to get out there in the public, and lots of these things, they just take a while before they come to light. It could be months or it can be years. And then once they finally do come to light, like I said, somebody has to be the first one to stick their toe in the water and find a lawyer and do something about it. So, you know, it can take some of these things 2, 3, 5 years to mature before it gets on somebody's public record.
The other thing too, I think that's useful in the broker check is obviously if they've got disciplinary actions or complaints, you know, those are permanent record on there. But if you find somebody who hasn't been in the industry very long or has been in the industry for quite some time, but tends to bounce from one brokerage firm to another brokerage firm and do it very quickly, that can be a little bit of a bad sign as well.
That can be. Tony, why don't we take another 30, 45 seconds for the next poll question?
Perfect. That second poll question is now up on everyone's screen. Your options are listed. I have a question here. It says, when you work with CPAs and law firms, are all fees disclosed to clients?
Not sure that's the question that's coming up. Is that, can you double check that one?
That's not the poll. That's a different question, I think.
No, this is a question from an attendee. The attendee is asking this question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay.
Can you repeat that question one more time, please?
Sure. It says, oh, did it just disappear?
Did you say, do you have to disclose fees in dealing with CPAs and law firms? Is that the question?
Something around that, yeah.
Because I can tell you guys that, you know, as an attorney, I'm actually licensed in the states of Indiana and Illinois. The ethical rules for attorneys are very clear on this particular point. If I am going to enter into a contingency fee agreement with a prospective client, which is almost always the way I do these cases, a 1/3 contingency fee is most common, I'm actually required to put that agreement in writing and have it accepted by the client. So people in my field, you know, routinely use engagement agreements. I use engagement agreements whether I'm doing business on a contingency fee or an hourly fee or some other way, just because, you know, I think it's important. I think it's important to have that disclosure out there for everybody to understand going into an engagement, you know, how it is that I'm going to get paid. And again, in the contingency fee cases, which is how we do 99% of these, I only get paid if my client gets paid. I only get paid if we settle a case and collect money, or we go to an arbitration hearing and we win money. So in the lawyer area, yeah, we're going to disclose that every single time, or run the risk of having our law licenses suspended.
All right, I close the poll. Back to you.
Okay, so Maya, did you put up that poll question number 2?
I did. It was left open for about 2 minutes, and we're all set to move on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to remind everybody the poll questions. We have a slide for the questions, but there's a separate, drop down that comes for the actual voting on those. So it's a little confusing. Apologize for that. Mark, we're running down to the last 10 minutes. We still have quite a bit of material to cover. I think we could take a lot more time to dig into these, but I think everybody's looking for, what things should they watch for? Coming into tax season where they're front and center with their clients, what kind of things should be on their radar screen?
Yeah, and that's the heart of this, folks. So, and I appreciate you guys again attending this conference because this is kind of the meat of it. So, the kind of things I think CPAs and tax preparers need to look for are, first and foremost, losses. Has the client, through their 1099 showing some unusual losses, higher losses than might be in character with what they've presented to you in prior years? Is the trading, are you just seeing like a bunch of trading on the 1099s that's out of character, with what you've seen in prior years? In asking your clients about any of these investments that get red flagged to you, if the client seems confused or doesn't understand exactly what they're invested in or why they lost so much money, that can be a red flag to you. Missing statements. A lot of these scammers aren't real attentive to providing investors with K1s or 1099s like a legitimate investment would spit out. So no statements or strange reporting, strange year-end reporting. Sometimes you'll see these scammers, they make a half-ass attempt to give somebody a K1, but you look at it and it's not really filled out completely or properly. Another big red flag that we see, it's also one of the first things we ask somebody is if they've made an investment with somebody, get us a copy of your check. Because if a check has been made out to an individual financial advisor, and not the name of a brokerage firm or the name of an insurance company, that is oftentimes a sign, big red flag that someone has been the victim of a Ponzi scheme or a theft. And I think we hit on this a little bit earlier too. If the investor, in quizzing the investor about a particular investment, if they tell you that, oh yeah, this particular investment is supposed to return, 10% a month, 25% a month, something that just seems really high and unrealistic, again, those are often signs of potential investment fraud. Tony, you got anything to add to that list?
No, I think the losses themselves are probably where you're going to see the most. But in the course of a tax season, you don't have a lot of time. But if you can ask people questions, sometimes they have an intuitive sense of something that they're invested in. If they don't think that they fully understand it, or they're disappointed, or they were told something that didn't come through exactly the way it was prescribed, that's kind of a first sign. But yeah, I think most of the firms are working with a reputable custodian, and the money is not made out to the firms or the individuals. The transactions are done through those custodians. The statements come through those custodians. You could have an advisor on the account, but you want that held at a reputable, multi-trillion-dollar custodian for sure.
Yeah, lots of lawyers who do what I do will give prospective clients free initial evaluations like I do. I mean, me and my firm are very happy to, if a CPA refers one of their clients to us, just because something looks weird, looks strange, looks possibly wrong. We give people, 2 to 10 hours of our time to look through their statements and talk with them to try to understand what's happened to them. So we give people free initial evaluations, and we're very happy. Well, I wouldn't say we're very happy, but I'm okay with the fact if I give somebody a free initial evaluation, at the end of it, I tell them everything looks okay. I'm just as happy as if I have to tell them, oops, something doesn't look right here, and I think you've been taken advantage of.
Mark, we're down to about 6 minutes here, so I want to cover these last topics real quick. The arbitration, as I understand it, it can be a 12 to 14 month period. I think you covered the contingency fee, but I think it's interesting for a lot of people. They come to the conclusion that yes, this is something that's been done to me, and I've lost money, but I don't want to take some action against this individual. If the individual works for a firm, that collectability goes to the firm, goes to their E&O insurance, or goes to the parent company, to the broker dealer, because they failed to supervise them properly in a lot of cases.
Yep, you're right. So you're right, Tony. We do see a lot of people who are also hesitant about going and talking to a lawyer because they don't want to get their broker in trouble, even though their broker may have done something improper or even bad to them. They're big-hearted people and they just don't want to get them in trouble. But you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, we are generally looking to the employers of these financial advisors, whether it's a brokerage firm or a registered investment advisory, as the deep pocket to compensate these investors back. In some instances, the brokerage firms are very significant businesses, and they're essentially self-insured to pay these settlements or these arbitration awards. Other brokerage firms go out and buy E&O or E&O insurance, basically, that can have policy limits of anywhere from $1 million to $5 million, $10 million, and the employer can turn to those carriers to pay them back. Also, in the registered investment advisory world, we see anecdotally, I think about 50% of the RIAs that we see have E&O insurance. So
I'm going to go ahead and launch that third poll. You guys can continue talking. I just want to get these polls out of the way. I'll launch them back to back. So that third poll is up. Go ahead and continue with your presentation.
So collectability is a big concern. And if for some reason, we have knowledge that a particular broker or brokerage firm is uncollectible, as some of them tend to be, when they're hanging on for dear life toward the end of their existence, we tell our clients that as well. And that can oftentimes be a reason not to go forward with the case.
Now, Mark, one of the topics we skipped over there was the tax treatment. And, in our experience working with your firm, that question comes up, how do you treat the taxability of this, which very often for accountants and CPAs, they've never seen it before in their career, that they've had a situation where this money is kind of dumped in their lap, and what's the best way to treat that. We do have some resources that we can share with you to give you a little bit of a tax opinion, not from us, but from some research that we've done through the years. And it's interesting, sometimes if that award comes into an IRA, you may not want to restore that money into the IRA, because then the client ultimately then has to pay tax on it again. So a little complication there. But
I'm going to go ahead and launch that last poll question. I just want the attendees to know. You guys can go ahead, and then I'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right, Tony. I mean, again, the tax question can be complicated. I'm not a tax lawyer myself, although I pose as one a lot in these cases, because we've literally had thousands of investors over the last 30 years that have made recoveries in these cases. I'll tell you what I generally find. We have some cases where all the losses for the investor is in a retirement account, an IRA, or some other type of 401k account. And in those instances, when we make a recovery, generally speaking, in working with the tax advisor, the client is advised to put the money back into the IRA or the 401k, and there's no tax consequences associated with that. In other cases, we sometimes have investors who might have some of the losses in a retirement account and some of the losses in a regular account. Then it gets to be, it gets to be a little bit complicated. An investor, often, since they have losses in a non-retirement account or a regular account, if they haven't taken those losses yet, they can oftentimes use the recoveries that we get them and kind of apply them to those losses and not have any tax consequences, for those amounts.
Mark,
Sometimes it's, yeah.
I'm going to cut you off. We're out of time. We could
Okay.
go on and on about these. I appreciate
Yeah, we
you
could.
on. Couple reminders I would give people. All of the questions that have been posted we can't possibly get to, but we will address those all individually after the program is over. We have your contact information. We'll reach out to you. Also, Mark has a book that he is willing to share with you. It's a digital book, so if you're interested, just contact one of us and we will get that information to you. Here is our contact information. And I also have a piece that we use that came from the Journal of Accountancy that talks about CPA firms and tax firms embracing the financial services world and the do's and don'ts for that. It's a 17-page report. Be happy to share that with people as well. And I think we're out of time. Thank you all for being here. Maya, do you want to close us up here?
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and get ready to wrap up with today's webinar. We here at CPAacademy.org will process credit later today. That'll be available in your CPAacademy.org accounts within 24 hours. Everyone will have an opportunity for a full webinar evaluation. Those links to the evaluation are available in your CPAacademy.org accounts as well as your email. Thanks again to our wonderful presenters for such a great presentation. We are always appreciative of your time and insights, and warm thanks to all of you in the audience for your participation today. We urge you to take a look at your CPAacademy.org My Account page and see all of the resources that we've made available to you there. Take a look at the other fantastic webinars we're able to offer. We hope to see you all in future webinars and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.